You know, niggas gotta get their priorities together. Got their mind on the wrong things, spending their money in the wrong way.
Trapaholic, real trap shit.
Say you need that car with the rims and a trunk, just like Jim. It's more than life. Yeah.
I'm telling you. Talk to him.
Say you need that LV bag with the belt and the hat.
That's all you got though.
It's more than life. Yeah.
Talk to him. Real.
Say you wanna turn up at the club, buy some bottles, impress them girls. It's more than life.
Fucking everybody.
Yeah.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Saints and Appetizers podcast and Who Dat. And we got a lot to go over here after all the cut downs and then the pickups on waiver wires and additions to the practice squad. And just like the cuts on Tuesday, I had to do some cuts and updates on my intro video. Had to cut some of those players off of there, like Will Lutz and Jarvis Landry. Had to. I'm not sure if the old video. I don't think it had Marcus Davenport on it, but had to do some of those cuts to update my new intro video. Nothing too fancy, but had to get it updated a little bit. But yeah, there's a lot that's happened over the last 2-3 days with the cut down to 53 and then getting up to 16 players on the practice squad. So, and this is the main course, some Saints news and activities. So let's get into this right now. So can I get a menu? And the first thing that happened like on Tuesday that just started out kind of making me being like what are the Saints doing here? And that the first cut came after there was a report that the Saints may trade Bradley Roby, that they were looking into trading him. So I was like, okay, yeah. I mean, over the 2 years that he's been here, he's been a solid player, not like a great player, not as if he's like a ball hawk or anything, but he just, unlike Charles Harris Jr. Last year when they had to sign him off the street, he wasn't complete trash. He was a stable, good player. But then shortly, how the Twitter feeds go, that when there's cut down dates and practice squad additions to the practice squad, the tweets just continue to roll and roll and roll. So that morning, Tuesday morning, I was pretty much looking at my phone like every 5 minutes, and there would be some other players cut or players traded. So I was just kind of keeping up with it. So I was kind of thinking, it would be. I'd be kind of bummed out and a little worried if they traded Bradley Roby because like in my previous podcast I stated, I'm not the biggest Lante Taylor fan. I thought he kind of looked kind of bad in the preseason. So, just I guess you kind of got to roll with if that happens or not. You kind of have to roll with it, and they ended up keeping Hugo Amadi, who I also was hard on a little bit after the Texans preseason game, mainly not because of his coverage, because he had like an interception against the Chiefs, but not really because of his coverage ability, but more because of the boneheaded play that he almost had made towards him, whether that would have been completely his fault on that punt return that was going to be muffed. But yeah, so keeping up with the tweets, shortly after seeing the one about Bradley Roby possibly getting traded, I finally kind of got over that, and I'm thinking like, oh, it'd be nice if they at least got to them. And then I look at the updates, and how they just straight up cut him, and that had a lot of people on Twitter and just Saints fans in the media just kind of scratching their head like, what are they doing? Just straight up cutting their supposedly was supposed to be their starting slot corner this year coming up. And I mean, you would have kind of got that impression that that's what the plans were with how they played him, because he only played, I'm pretty sure he really only played like in the first game. So he wasn't playing a lot, similar to what happens with starters. They don't play very much in preseason. That's whether they're going to be a starter or maybe a team's looking to trade a player. So they don't play them because they don't want to get them hurt, to lower their value. So yeah, that was the first one. And then I can't remember if Jalen Smith was cut first, or I think the trade happened. And then we had a trade happen when they were talking about Blake Grupe and Will Lutz. I think a lot of people were interested, knew that there was a tight battle between those two. And after the game against the Texans, besides the fact that Blake Grupe just kind of slightly wide right missed a 60-yard field goal, before that happened, he kicked banged a 50-yarder right down the middle, and that pretty much had me kind of leaning towards Grupe anyways. But then he misses that one, and I was kind of thinking, well, I'd rather kind of stick with the veteran, So, but they ended up trading him, and this has been a rumor in the rumor mill that had been going around for a while, saying that the Denver Broncos and Sean Payton may be interested in trading for one of the Saints kickers. And what do you know? They end up getting him, and the Saints get back. I know it's just a 2024 seventh round pick, but you got to look at it in perspective that it's a kicker that would technically be considered your second string kicker, and they got a 2024 seventh round pick, while I think the Patriots traded Nick Folk for a 2025. I think they traded him to the Tennessee Titans for a 2025 seventh round pick. So I mean, that's quite a bit of a improvement. That's that kind of puts things in perspective. That obviously they think more of Will Lutz. At least the Broncos think more of Will Lutz than the Patriots thought of Nick Folk. Because I was saying before the 2025. It's 2 years away and it's a seventh round pick. That's basically nothing. At least they got another draft pick in the next draft that's coming up. But it turned out that they talking about more cuts here. I'm just going to stick with the special teams. That they get rid of Blake Gillikin as well, and they go with the 30-year-old Headley. So the Saints, other than the long snapper Zach Woods, they have pretty much a completely revamped new special teams with a new punter, a new kicker, and they're all rookies. Even though Blake Grupe's 30 years old, I think he was in college for like 6 years or something like that, and he was in Australia and was a tattoo artist and all that business, but still he's a rookie and hasn't played in the NFL. So yeah, that I'll just say that I'm a little uneasy about that, about them not going with the veteran and Will Lutz, and even the punter a little bit, just Lou Headley. Even though I don't think Blake Gillikin was never the quality and high level of player that Will Lutz was. Will Lutz and his peak was like an elite kicker, hitting 90%. But you got to look at it in perspective. Out of like starting kickers last year, Will Lutz was only like 74%, which was like the worst out of kickers that played in like 15 games or more. So, I mean, is it a loss? I guess we'll have to wait and see when following both of those teams, which one of those kickers ends up missing a critical or a game-winning field goal, and then we'll be able to argue and come back and cry and complain about it. But so yeah, that's what happened like early on with some of the cuts. But another cut that happened that also had people throwing their arms up and worrying about depth, definitely linebacker depth, is the cut of Jalen Smith. So Jalen Smith was cut, but there was a little more like understanding there. That I think there was a handshake deal there between the Saints and Jalen Smith that knowing that he's getting cut now, so the Saints can fill out their practice squad or add players to the injured reserve list. So they knew. I think the Saints knew, and Jalen Smith knew that he was going to come back. So people were still up in arms, wondering why Jalen Smith was getting cut, considering he had such a good preseason, looked so good in the preseason. But he sent out a tweet, with the one to God, to God, faith in that with the praying hand. So it kind of let you know that he knew what was going on. So that was a bit of a shocker. Those are like the three biggest shocks there for sure. Is the Bradley Roby cut on Tuesday, the trade of Will Lutz, and then Jalen Smith getting cut, because people were just wondering what the Saints were doing. But you gotta wait and see what they're gonna do with the 53-man roster. And definitely on the day of Tuesday, when they get down to 53 men to 53 men on the roster, you got to understand that there's no way that's actually after week one, and they can sign players without their contracts being guaranteed. Like the roster is going to be like probably quite a bit different than what it is right now, because they'll be able to sign some veteran players and try some other players that that could be better than who they have now, but they could also be complete busts. So they don't want to have to guarantee anyone's contract. But let's go over just the 53-man roster. We'll go over it real quick. So we'll start with quarterback here, and so there's Saints ended up keeping three quarterbacks. They kept obviously your starter Derek Carr, your backup Jameis Winston, and then your reserve Jake Haener. I think everyone probably expected that. And then with running backs, you got your starter Jamal Williams, because Alvin Kamara, because he's on the commissioner's suspended list, he doesn't count against the Saints 53, so he's not on here. So Jamal Williams is your starter. And then you have Kendre Miller and Kirk Merritt, who maybe some people were surprised that Kirk Merritt made the team over players like Ellis Merriweather, because he was hurt towards the end of preseason, and he is a converted wide receiver. But that's who they ended up keeping on their roster for their three running backs. And just a little note here about Kendre Miller, he's kind of showing that he's a little injury prone, honestly. So already back, they had a practice. Trying to think, I think they practiced on Tuesday, probably Wednesday too. And I'm not sure that Dennis Allen didn't specify, but Kendre Miller already has a hamstring injury, has a little hamstring injury, and he just, when asked how severe it is, he said, we'll know in a week. So we'll give you an update in a week. That doesn't give me much faith. These hamstrings can be tricky, and he already, before this, was dealing with a knee injury, which he magically came back from early and actually played in that Chargers game after hurting it in the Chiefs game. So hopefully he has those quick healing abilities and will be able to come back for week one, because if not, they'll be the whole load will be on Jamal Williams' shoulders, and then pretty. I'm not that high on Kirk Merritt either. So I like Jamal Williams as the starter. Getting the start due to Alvin Kamara's injury, but not a huge fan of the depth isn't as good as you'd like it to be, especially with Kendre Miller hurt. So let's just like I said, pray that he's ready to go. All right, so that's running backs. Gone over running backs and got that little injury report out of the way. And then they kept one fullback. They kept Adam Prentice, and then they didn't keep any backups or reserve. That's not a real surprise. Some teams don't even have fullbacks on their teams. And then with tight ends, they kept Juwan Johnson as your starter, and then Foster Monroe as your backup, and then Jimmy Graham as like your reserve. And then you got a flex player on here, one flex player. I wonder if you guys can guess who the flex player is. Yes, of course, that's Taysom Hill, which some people list him as a fullback, but I think a flex player or a striker is a good category to have him in. And then onto the offensive line, you have Trevor Penning as your starting left tackle, and then Landon Young as your backup to him. And then with left guard, you have James Hurst as your starter. So it looks like Andres Pete might not be actually your starter coming into week 1. And then you have Andres Pete behind him, and then you have Nick Salvadere, the rookie 4th-round pick, as a reserve there. And then with the center, you have 2 centers, Eric McCoy, Max Garcia, and then right guards, just the one right guard, which I'm sure Nick Salvadere or Andres Pete, they can go and play right guard if something was to happen to Cesar Ruiz. And then you have the one right tackle and Ryan Ramczyk. And like I said, those players like tackles and like Landon Turner, that I'm sure they're flexible. If Ryan Ramczyk got hurt, I'm sure he could play right tackle if needed. And then on to wide receiver, we have Michael Thomas as your starter. Your 3 starters are, we have, let's see, 6 wide receivers they ended up keeping. And obviously your 3 starters are Michael Thomas, Chris Olave, and Rashid Shaheed. And then your backups are A.T. Berry, Keith Kirkwood, and Traquan Smith. Not a real surprise, no real surprise there, except maybe some people would have liked to see Traquan Smith maybe get cut and see a player like Shaq Davis or John Trey Kirkland actually make the 53 over Traquan Smith. But I guess when healthy, I guess people consider him one of the best blocking wide receivers in the league. I mean, that's kind of his best attribute, is he can block well, but man, he just never seems to be healthy, if nothing else. All right, then on to special teams. We already kind of went over that. So your new punter is Lou Headley, and your new kicker is Blake Grupe, and your long time, I would say, he gets disrespected on Madden. His Madden rating gets disrespected. I'd say he's one of the better long snappers in the league, and he's been here for a little while, as Zach Wood. So quite a bit of a turnover there, and you got to take into account when you get a new kicker, get a new punter, that mixes up the holder situation. So hopefully Lou Headley can be a quality holder on top of everything else for Blake Grupe as well. Laces out. And then going to the defense here, we have for your starting defensive ends, you have Cam Jordan and Carl Granderson. And then your backups, you have Tano Passanio, Nephi Sewell, and oh no, those are linebackers. For your backups, you got Tano Passanio, Peyton Turner, and Isaiah Foskey. So they keep 5 defensive ends, and then they keep 4 defensive tackles with your 2 starters, Nathan Shepard, Colin Saunders, and then of course Brian Breesy and Malcolm Roach. And I look at those 4 players. They say like the Brian Breesy and Malcolm Roach are like backups, but I just see like a starting rotation from those 4, honestly, because Brian Breesy showed out in the preseason. Malcolm Roach looked good as well. Only saw Nathan Shepard and Colin Sanders really in the first game against the Chiefs. All right, then to linebacker. Now to linebacker, Saints are keeping 3 middle linebackers. So Demario Davis, your starter, Nephi Sewell, your backup, and DeMarco Jackson, your reserve. And then weak side linebacker, you have Pete Warner as your starter, and strong side linebacker, you have Zach Bond as your starter. And like I've said here, I'm sure Nephi Sewell or DeMarco Jackson can play weak or strong side linebacker if somehow an injury happens to one of those players. Or they'll activate Jalen Smith from the practice squad. All right, so then on to safety here. It's you got your 2 starting safeties, Tyrann Mathieu and Marcus Maye, and then they actually kept Jordan Howden, rookie, and then they kept Lonnie Johnson Jr. and JT Gray, who's more of a special teams player than anything. And then mentioning Jordan Howden, one of the Saints draft picks from 2023. All the draft picks from this draft all made the 53-man roster. So that's pretty exciting because the last time that happened was in 2017, and we know how many great players came from that draft. So hopefully that ends up being the same type of situation. Hopefully we get some 3 or 4 star players out of this draft if the Saints feel so comfortable in keeping all of them on their 53-man roster. And then to corner here, we have the 3 starters, which of course are Marshawn Lattimore, Paulson Adebo, and then your slot, Lante Taylor, and then you got your backups, Isaac Yiadom and Hugo Amade are your 2 backups there. So that's your 53-man roster. Expect there to be some change here, of course, because after week 1 or once some players are put on injured reserve, things will change quite a bit. But maybe feeling a little uneasy about the special teams group, and not just the punter and the kicker, but also the return coverage wasn't great as well. And then I've been kind of rough on Alontae Taylor, but not having that extra veteran presence, and Bradley Roby is a little concerning. But who knows? Who knows it after week 1 if the Saints struggle a little bit at corner and Bradley Roby still out there, they may sign him after week 1, just so they don't have to guarantee that veteran contract, because I think he was scheduled to make about $4 million this year, and I think his cap hit was like less than $2 million, but it was like 1.5 or $1.2 million cap hit. So they saved some money by cutting him, but who knows? He could possibly come back. That's potential for him to come back. All right, we'll go over special teams here as well, because it's already been mixed up a little bit. So on Wednesday they did sign Ellis Merriweather, who's your practice squad running back, but they've already swapped him out with 2 other running backs, Jordan Mims from the Miami Dolphins and Tony Jones Jr., who was actually with the Broncos. So there's a little, we've been talking about Sean Payton and the Denver Saints over there signing. I think they had before their cut downs, they had like 5 or 6 ex-Saints players on their team. So Saints get the jab the knife, jab the fork a little bit at the Broncos and sign one of their players to their practice squad, which the Saints need the depth at running back with by signing Jordan Mims and Tony Jones Jr. So don't be surprised on game day if one of those guys gets activated, especially if Kendra Miller's hamstring is something more serious than a weak recovery. And then for left guard, they signed Mark Evans, the second, to their practice squad, and then center Tommy Creamer, right tackle Storm Norton. So they've added that's 3 offensive linemen to their practice squad. And these mostly are all players the Saints wanted to keep. These are all, other than Tony Jones Jr. and Jordan Mims, those are like the only players that they added to their practice squad that weren't with them already. But the Saints did, we were just talking here about the offensive line. Saints did lose Calvin Throckmorton to the Carolina Panthers, which that one hurts a little bit, seeing how he was an offensive lineman who had flexibility and had started 20 games. I definitely think if the Panthers wouldn't have signed them to their practice squad, the Saints would have liked to have added him to their practice squad. So that one hurts a little bit. And on to some wide receiver, practice squad wide receivers. They signed Shaq Davis, who looked good at times in preseason. John Trey Kirkland, who looked good in the final preseason game against the Texans. And then Lynn Bowden Jr., I think he did some returns punt returns, kick returns. So those are all guys that showed out a little bit in preseason. So those are all young guys with some potential. And then there's no practice squad special teams players. Didn't get to keep Will Lutz on our practice squad. Didn't get to keep Blake Gilligan on our practice squad, even though I think Blake Gilligan's still a free agent. And then no special teams, no long snapper either. And then onto the defense here for the practice squad. They add Kyle Phillips, defensive end, Jack Hefline, defensive tackle, and another defensive end. I think he played defensive tackle some as well. Some people have him labeled as a defensive end. Other people have him labeled as a defensive end. Some defensive end, some defensive tackle. But I think all those sacks he had, sacks and pressures, he had like 6 or 7 sacks in the preseason. All of those, most of them came from the defensive end spot. And then linebacker, middle linebacker Ryan Connolly, which it's good to see that they added him and that he didn't go to injured reserve, because I'd heard some rumors that he had a knee injury, so that's nice to see. And then they added a weak side linebacker and Farini Orji, middle linebacker, and then Jalen Smith. They were able to get Jalen Smith back on the roster at strong side linebacker, and then Ty Summers, who didn't actually make the team. He got swapped out. Ty Summers was like a strong side linebacker that made the initial practice squad, but here on Thursday he got swapped out for either Jordan Mims or Tony Jones Jr. And then the Saints kept one safety, Jonathan Abrams, the veteran Jonathan Abrams, and one practice squad corner, and Anthony Johnson, who I thought actually looked kind of terrible in the game against the Texans. But that's your practice squad for now. You just a day after it was set, there's already been changes to it. So continue that. Expect that to continue. And then we already talked about how Calvin Throckmorton the Saints weren't able to get Calvin Throckmorton added to their practice squad. And we talked about how the Saints took one of the Broncos players finally. Well, that's kind of what I'm getting to here, is the Saints didn't have a backup tight end, practice squad tight end, because they weren't able to add Lucas Krull to their practice squad. And I wonder why that is. That is because John Payton and the Broncos, they had a waiver waiver claim ahead of the Saints, and they were able to add Lucas Krull to their practice squad. So if anything happens with Juwan Johnson, Foster Monroe, Jimmy Graham, and the Saints somehow need a tight end, they can always sign Lucas Krull off of the Broncos practice squad, but he'll have to be activated. He'll have to be signed to their active 53-man roster. So, just we got a little dig from getting Tony Jones Jr. off the Broncos and helping our running back depth, but at the same time we lost a player that looked like he had some potential. It looked like he was an athletic tight end. And there's a lot of there's quite a few people out there that say Lucas Krull should have made the team over Jimmy Graham, but you win some and you lose some, and that's pretty obvious with the addition of Tony Jones Jr. and then the loss of Lucas Krull. But I think that's pretty much sums up the Saints' 53-man roster and their new practice squad. And I think with what you have there I like it. I like the roster that they have, and I like that they were able to sign the majority of the players that they had in camp with them. So just have to wait and see if there's any more changes. And after week 1, who knows, there may be some talented veterans out there that they may be able to sign for depth, or maybe even a starter. They just won't have to guarantee any contracts then. But I think that's all I have for you for this evening. And can I get a who dat? And can I get a check, please?